The Shooting Range. In this episode, the curious case of the T-20. They made it good, but nobody needed it. The Handley-Page Hampden, one of the first new wave bombers of the British. Hotline. The developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with probably the most legendary tank in the Soviet tree, the T-34. Today, we look at one of the brightest legends of the Soviet tank industry, the one and only T-34. It was developed in the late 30s, but it serves its purpose even now, at least in some countries. As for the game, we've included almost all of its major modifications to the Soviet tech tree. Despite having the same name, looks, and basic parameters, the tanks of this family are sometimes very different from each other. If we take a look at the game and all the T-34s in it, we can divide them into three separate groups. The early models with 76 and 57mm weapons, the later ones with 85 and 100mm guns, and the machines that are based on the T-34. We meet the earliest models at the BR 3.3. Those are the T-34 prototype, also known as the A-34, and the T-34 1940. The difference is in the details. For example, the A-34 has a lantern above the weapon barrel and doesn't have any toolboxes on the hull. Also, it's faster as it has a bit more powerful engine, but both tanks have a 76mm gun, the L-11. Next, at BR from 3.7 to 4.0, we get to the T-34 1941 and 1942, the T-34E and the T-34E STZ. They also have a similar gun, a 76mm Cannon F-34. They've all got better armor, about 30 to 50mm up comparing to the first two tanks, but the protection rate is pretty much the same, as the BR is also higher. The latest tanks of the first group are the T-34-57 and the T-34-57 model 1943 at BR 4.3 and 4.7 respectively. They are as agile and protected as the earliest models of this line. Then, why do they have such a high BR? It's because they have new weapons piercing 130 to 180 millimeters of armor at a very good fire rate. Moving on to later modifications of the T-34, here we can see the variants of the T-34-85. One of those, created to rival the Panthers and the Tigers, became that living legend that everybody's talking about. We meet the first modifications of this machine starting from BR 5.3. It's the one with the D5T gun. Its piercing rate is a bit lower than the T-34-57 model 1943, but its high explosive shells are a lot more effective when it comes to actually blowing stuff up after the armor is penetrated. This tank has also got a bigger turret, which enabled adding another crew member. Now we finally get to the legend itself, the T-34-85 with an extremely powerful ZIS S-53 gun, piercing 180mm of armor. This fast and deadly tank has two variants in the game, the usual one and the T-34-85E modification. As for the last member of this group, it's the T-34-100. The name speaks for itself. It's got a 100mm gun, the LB-1, which is powerful enough to get this tank at BR 6.7, though the armor is pretty much the same. This was one of the main reasons why this modification was never mass-produced. This last group, the tech based on the T-34, strictly speaking, these aren't the T-34 you're looking for, but we couldn't let them be forgotten today. They are many, especially in the tank destroyer branch. For example, we can find here the Su-85, the Su-100, and even the Su-122 with an M30 howitzer. There is even one SPAA in the game that is based on the T-34. It's the Type 56. So you can say, this is all good, but what about the tactics? Well, it's fairly simple. On the earliest modifications, you can do literally anything that would be useful for your team. Using the later ones, pretty much the same, but remember not to go in frontal attacks and take care of your armor. And now let's remember how the Americans were trying to replace the Sherman. During the early 30s, the British created the famous Vickers 6-ton. This reliable, maneuverable and cheap tank didn't get a lot of love at home, but it sure got plenty of it around the world, from Bolivia to Finland. Of course, it came by the American shores as well, and set a course for the development of its tank industry for the next 10 years. The light T-1s weren't nearly as good in any way, so the Americans decided to adopt this tank for their own purposes. They didn't have an engine that would be this compact and powerful at the same time, so they used a radial engine with an air cooling system. It was very high, so the hull turned out to be quite high as well, though very short. A couple of other solutions proved to be useful as well, among them a new type of suspension and rubber metal caterpillars. The result had a form of a light, reliable and agile tank that was named the T-2. Its construction became a base for a whole family of American tanks, all the way up to the Sherman, and then the engineers got stuck. The thing was, the shaft was going from the engine to the transmission at an angle. In the T-2, it cut the operational space into two halves, and the tankers had to jump over it while working their thing. On the Shermans, they'd installed an additional floor in the turret, which was comfortable for the crew, but the price was the ridiculously high profile of this tank. That meant a lot of extra weight and very complicated transportation process, which was critical for the Americans. So, as early as 1942, when the mass production of the Shermans had just begun, the military ordered a replacement for it, the new T-20 tank with a 76mm long barrel gun and a stabilizer. It was supposed to become an answer to the newest Panzer IV F2s that the Allies had just met in Africa. By the way, almost all the ammo was located under the turret, a move that we can see in the Soviet machines like the T-34 and the KV-1. The tank had a compact and powerful V engine by Ford, a very rational layout, and a hydromechanical transmission that was a game-changer at the time. All of that made the machine very interesting for the military command. Hell, it was faster and deadlier than the Sherman, and also half a meter lower and several tons lighter. Of course they were interested. At the same time, the engineers were developing the modifications of the T-20. The T-22E1 had a common mechanical transmission and less powerful 75mm gun, but with an autoloader. The T-23 got an electric transmission that enabled driving the tank directly from the turret. And though it was extremely heavy, it provided very good maneuverability. The tests were going as they should, until the Allies encountered the new German Tigers. At that moment, the T-20 became as outdated as a digging stick. The Tigers were a lot better in both protection and the armament. Time to make some new tanks. These were the T-25 and the T-26 with a 90mm gun in an enlarged turret. But in the end, only the reworked T-26, named after General Pershing, fought a couple of battles in Europe. The rest didn't even make it in time. On the one hand, the engineers of the T-20 did fulfill their task and created a lighter and more powerful tank to replace the Sherman. The T-20 at that moment was absolutely luxurious. A stabilizer, a hydromechanical transmission, an extra generator, and lots of other cool things. Compared to, say, the T-34, it looked like a brand new Lamborghini next to a good old Ford Anglia. But on the other hand, due to the constant changes and refinements, the new middle tanks barely got to fight at all. Was there a point then? That is a good question. And now back to England, where they were building a brand new bomber, without knowing how to. During the early 30s, the world aviation industry was carried away with an idea of creating a perfect shape for an aircraft. No more clumsy biplanes, non-retractable chassis, open cockpits and half-wooden constructions. Now it was time to make smooth, speedy and beautiful things. Also, at about the same time, Giulio Douhet wrote a hugely influential book entitled The Command of the Air, that basically said, all hail the bombers. As soon as the monoplane started breaking the speed records, the British military command demanded the creation of a new bomber. The requirements were very strict. 2 gun turrets with wide shooting angles, 1.5 tons of payload opportunities, preferably a full metal construction, and speed, at least 350 kph. Even though the plane should have had 2 engines that were still under 1,000 horsepower each. Oh, and surely, the aircraft should be as cheap as possible. We're in crisis, don't you know? Only the 3 British companies answered the call, and each one of them followed their own strange ways. The Vickers Company introduced the Wellington, soon to be famous big bomber with unusual geodesic structural elements. We've talked about this one in episode 6 of The Shooting Range. Engineers from Armstrong Whitworth presented the Whitley bomber project that looked rather old-fashioned and couldn't rush to insane speed limits, but it had a mind-blowing flight range. The third project, called the Hampden, came from the Handley-Page Company. It was the most progressive of the 3, especially in the aerodynamics part. Its chief engineer was Gustav Lachmann, ex-pilot of the German Empire, now a British aircraft designer without citizenship. Building this plane, he opted for maximum compactness and lightness in every possible way. The thing was, there was no easy or even known way to do it. All he had was a simple wind tunnel and his own intuition. The aircraft received a narrow 2-story fuselage that ended right after the wings, and after that, there was a long tail with a horizontal empennage and 2 fins. For the weird looks, the Hampden was immediately called a Pan's Handle, and when a test pilot first saw the prototype, he angrily advised the creators to paint it green. Then it surely would quack as well. Still, the Handley-Page Company created a fast and easily handled aircraft with great visibility from its cockpit. Plus, they'd installed their brand new slats that were later destined to become classic. These provided very comfortable takeoffs and landings. And of course, the aircraft was very cheap and could be mass-produced. Though it became obsolete by the beginning of the Second World War, it is remembered as one of the first high-powered, narrow-fuselaged bombers, alongside the great SB-2 and Dornier 17. But it could hardly fly over the English Channel and couldn't resist the newest Luftwaffe fighters. Its career in the Royal Air Force ended in the middle of 1942. The planes were taken out of action and then transferred to training fields or given to the USSR. The Soviet pilots used them a lot, mostly as tactical short-range nighttime bombers. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show, Hotline, developers answering questions from the comments. The first question was asked by a user called Gabriel Duchesne. Gaijin, where are my French ships? Ah, monsieur, le même endroit, the same place, where the rest of them are, getting ready to be released this year, after a series of tests and all that. The second question comes from a player called Emerald Chest. What would you expect you find? Gaijin, February 18, 2018. I expect the F4 Phantom, please. Hey there, mate. We're working on all these new aerial toys as hard as we can. But if we don't make them interesting enough for you, it will all be in vain, won't it? So please, have some patience while we're testing the hell out of those crazy OP planes to squeeze them into the existing balance. A player called David NK asks, could you add an ocean map, please? Hi there. We actually have a couple of very picturesque maps with sea and ocean shores already. For example, the Normandy and the jungle are accessible for ground tech. And there are lots of oceanic views for aircraft pilots, like, say, New Guinea. And of course, there'll be a lot of that when the naval battles come to the game. And if you mean an ocean map, where there's only an ocean and nothing else, isn't it kinda boring? And the very last serious message comes from Yak. Hey Gaijin, I'm going to the store. You need something? Actually, yeah, can you bring some Russian bias ultra spicy? People are asking for it in the comments and we've run out. That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.